This is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it is time for Care Notes with Doug Roper from Cherished Companions. So, Doug, what are we going to talk about today? As if I don't know.
Well, we're going to talk about kind of you and the experiences that you've gone through. Unfortunately, in having just lost Rich, and I think that when something is fresh like that, there's a different perspective that you're going to have. And unfortunately, as we age, the one thing I think that is really common is that we're going to suffer loss. And I think that so few people understand what that means. I was just listening to someone the other day, and they were talking about how that most men consider their wives their best friends, and when they lose their spouse, their world collapses because slowly but surely their wives became the center of their world, and many can't recover from that because they don't have the social circles in order to do that, and so they struggle themselves deeply. So um, you know the I lost a friend, and this isn't you know obviously the same thing as losing your husband, but I lost a very very dear friend that I had known since I was um, uh, in 10th grade, and we were best friends and had been over all those years. He was a roommate in college. There was all sorts of things. And the grief I felt from that has taken years because it was a sudden death and you don't anticipate that. And it really took a long time to get over the loss of someone that I had been like a brother.
Right.
Um, and so, and frankly, I think with loss like that, you really never truly get over it.
You don't.
You learn to live with the pain, and you learn to continue living even with that. So, I guess my question would be, this was for you a sudden thing, which I think sudden is among the hardest of things to deal with when it comes to death, because you have no sort of means of preparation.
Right.
It wasn't like a heart attack um, where like someone has sudden death with that, but it was a quick, you
Right.
know, um, uh, from the onset of something to his passing. And I guess the question I have is, um, tell me, like, as best as you can summarize, um, what this path has been like, because I know that the one thing I do know is it's not been easy, you
No.
know.
So the interesting part is for quite a long time, my husband and I, we would have many discussions about what would happen if we lost each other. And he loved to tell me that if I went first, the next day he'd be out getting a girlfriend because he didn't want to live alone. I mean, he was point blank, and I truthfully believe he would at least been out there looking, whether he found one or not. Um, but my comment always to him was, I don't think I want to find anybody else.
Hmm.
And uh, he would say, "Oh yeah, you'll find somebody. I don't want you to be alone." But we knew enough about that we weren't going to be 100% alone. We knew who we could count on in our immediate family.
Mm.
And he ensured that all of our paperwork was in order, which I have to say it was, but it wasn't.
Oh,
It
the
was,
best laid plans.
it was like 99%, but there have been changes in the law. And so
Oh,
sometimes the paperwork that you have written up early on, you need to have it tweaked as time goes on.
that's a good
So
lesson.
yeah, so
Yeah,
just for people to understand that, I would have had we had no idea, and we just
yeah,
did our paperwork 5 years ago, and the law had changed just enough. But we got in under the wire to make the changes, and we're fine. But um, so we thought we were all set. When I first heard that maybe there was a problem, I sort of panicked. Um, but luckily, I have two grown sons who said to me, "Mom, don't panic. Dad will hate us if you panic. We're going to help you at least go through the everyday motions." Um, and they've been fantastic. And they've allowed me to be as independent as I want to be. I also want to say as independent as I can be from day to day,
yeah.
because grief can throw you a boomerang. And this happened to me probably about 3 or 4 weeks in. I thought everything was going great. And my son asked me to call on the insurance policy to find out what the delay was. The phone number was right in front of me. I could not dial it. Every time I put it in, I was getting the wrong number, no matter what I did. And I called my oldest son crying, like,
Yeah.
why can't I do this? Well, luckily he had the number. He called and he patched me in. I have no idea. It's the only time that happened to me, but
Yeah.
it scared me. And uh, luckily, it was recommended that I talk to my grief coach, who explained to me this grief brain, and it happens, and it will happen again. Um, but for the most part, I think because my husband and I had paperwork together, we had talked about certain things. Not that I was prepared,
Right.
but I just, because of my personality, I knew what I had to do. And that was, I have to keep moving. Um,
So,
and I chose I didn't want to just sit here and cry day after day because
yeah.
he wasn't going to come back. And um, I had to find a purpose to keep going.
Well, if you're like many people, sometimes people can't even cry immediately. They store it up, and then all of a
Yep.
sudden, it'll manifest itself in lots of different things. Not least of which maybe grief brain.
Right.
Right?
Uh, and
Um,
and I will say, I truly, compared to a lot of the women that I have met over the last 14 weeks, I really have not cried. A tear here and there. I feel it internally.
right. Oh
I'm
yeah.
okay. And I hear some women who will say, all I do is sit in the house and cry hour after hour. We all grieve differently. But one of the things that I was taught by my parents is how to live.
Hmm.
And you're right, we're all going to lose someone, parents, siblings, cousins, aunts, uncles, friends. Um, and I just had to keep going back, reminding myself I was very lucky. My husband loved me for at least 42 years.
Yeah.
Now, he died 2 weeks short of our 42nd anniversary. So maybe
You'll
it
have to take
wasn't
that
40.
up with him later,
Yeah.
right?
And I'm glad you brought that up because I read something yesterday that's been bothering me. There was a woman who wrote that she talked to her clergy, and her clergy person said to her, it's death till you part. And when somebody dies, it's over and done with.
Mm.
And I'm going to say, for me, at least in my spiritual believing, that's not true.
Mm-hmm.
Because I can't give up 42 years of history and connection. So if you're listening, maybe your clergy believes that, but you got to go by what you believe in your heart. And I think that's what gets me through each day, is that I'm carrying Richard with me. I've got his energy. And I'm going to make the best of whatever days I have left.
Yeah, and I think I may have asked you this before, but um, faith plays a really big part in my life, and I can't imagine approaching of the loss without having a spiritual foundation of some sort.
Right.
Because to me the world doesn't make sense without that. I mean, it literally doesn't make sense to me that there's it it um I, I remember years ago seeing a documentary, and on the documentary there was a gorilla that was um, was in the wild, and they were
Yep.
filming it, and the gorilla had a baby, and the baby had died. And I was seeing the gorilla grappling with death, lifting up the
Yep.
arm and it dropping, lifting up the arm and the baby it dropping. And it was an epiphany of sorts. I thought, what we had learned, or what I have learned, which is we were not made for a world where death was a part of it, that this was a part of something that's a bigger story. And because even nature says this isn't normal, this isn't
Yep.
natural. And so the only way I can get context for that is my faith to say, okay, this gives structure, this gives me an understanding of things. How have you struggled through that, or worked through that, or had even graces that come from a belief system?
So the interesting part was my husband was brought up Christian. I was brought up Jewish. And when we talked about how we would handle each other's remains, initially we talked about, the traditional cemetery with headstones and everything, until we started realizing the cost of that. And also realizing that our boys don't even live in town. So are they going to even come back to a cemetery plot if that's where we're buried? So that's when we decided that cremation was the way we were going to go. And that was going to be, our boys would get to decide where they wanted to spread the ashes, or what they wanted to do. In the meantime, the day that my husband died, there is, in the Jewish religion, you would sit what is called Shiva for 7 days from the day of burial. But he wasn't being buried. And so now I was questioning myself. Am I allowed to say the mourner's prayer? Am I allowed to feel this sense of tradition? And so I contacted 4 different rabbis, from the most religious to the most,
Secular.
secular, benign, whatever you want to call them.
Yeah.
And all 4 said the same thing to me: do what you need to do. And so I lit the memorial candle, and for 7 days, I said the mourner's prayer. And at first, I thought that was being hypocritical because, well, Rich isn't Jewish and I really don't practice. But it was the spiritual behind it more than anything else. And I'm glad I did it because he saw me do it for my parents. He saw me do it for my brother. And I think if he was watching, he would have said, thank you.
Hmm.
But I did it for me. And that's one of the things that we don't think about when we're grieving. We're thinking about what everybody else expects of us. And that was the same thing when we had um, the celebration of life. I cannot tell you how many people said to me, well, are you going to have clergy there? Are you guys going to say prayers? And I said, no, it's just an open house. It's to come share with me, my boys. If you're Rich's friend, tell us about that. If you're my friend, share with me. That to me was the most meaningful for us because if we would have done something along the religious, aspect, I don't know what we would have chosen. And so
So,
it's worked.
oh, I didn't mean to interrupt. The prayer that you were saying, um, the, did you say it in Hebrew or did you say it in
Now
English?
I can recite it in Hebrew, but I did it
Hmm.
both ways. And the interesting part is growing up, we were always told, you don't say this prayer unless you have lost at least one parent. So, in theory, if both my parents were living and Richard passed away, according to tradition, I could not say the prayer. And
Hmm.
I never understood that because the prayer is for the living, it is not for the dead. And so, um, when I asked the so called permission to be able to say the prayer, that's when I went back and really read the English translation and realized this is supporting me. This is my journey. And that's really what the 7 days of Shiva are in the 30 days that precede it. It's for you to go through whatever you need to go through and to keep moving. And
Right.
that's the example that I saw my parents have. It was like, yes, we're sad. Yes, we're crying. Yes, we're remembering. But tomorrow I have to get up again. And the next day I've got to move forward. And I just took all that and said, okay, if they could have done it, I can do it.
So the prayer itself, just
Yeah.
in because I have read it before, but in the English, but in essence, what does it say?
So it's telling you that you're going to be okay. That you know you're reaching out to the community when you're saying it. So in theory, you're standing in the synagogue in a group of people. Only the mourners are in theory standing up, and this is how you're being encompassed. You're being welcomed, and you're being offered um, condolences of some sort. But it's a
Mhm.
support, and so every time I read it, I felt more and more, even though I'm doing it alone in my house. Okay.
Mhm.
Um, and the strange part was I still didn't have his ashes here. So I'm saying it basically to a wall. Um, and Rich didn't like having a lot of his pictures around the house. So I didn't really have, other than our bedroom, I didn't have any pictures of him. And so it was like I had to do that. And so now that week, I kept going and looking for more and more pictures of him. And now my whole office is covered with Richard pictures.
Oh, whether he likes it or not, right?
Yeah, I'm loving it. He's there with me 24/7 now.
So, what I kind of what I have gleaned from what you've been saying is that you have pre-talked about things which really made a difference.
Right,
That you had things prepared as best as you knew how,
right,
which helped, and what glitches happened, you were able to work through those things. that I've also heard support, that you are getting a lot of support from your family,
Right.
especially in this. But I know it was probably larger than
Yeah.
that, because you talked about grief counseling and other things. It sounds like somehow you've gotten some support as well. Like, because are you in a grief group as well?
I decided not to join an actual grief group. I joined two things online, which um, is a
That's
group.
kind of a group,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, but through that, I've met individuals who live in the area, um, mostly women. I got in trouble on Facebook because I tried to set up a gathering of women, and I was told that I was being discriminatory. And
Oh,
I had to explain, I'm really not, but I, I'm not ready to sit down with a group of men. And I didn't want this group to show up and have it be all men and me sitting there. Um, and so I tried to explain it's because I need to have women friends right now. I need to understand how we process this differently. Um, but the interesting part is I'm now in a group with about, I think there's six of us, all different stages of widowhood. Um, and I can really relate to them beautifully. Um, and it's so important to find your community. And
mhm.
for anybody who's out there, I know everybody says it's hard to make friends as you get older. The truth is, in some ways, it's much easier
Mm.
because I started with Facebook. And then on Facebook, I said, well, who lives in Northeast Ohio? From Northeast Ohio, I got closer to my own area. And I started finding people and then inviting people to meet me for coffee at Panera.
Mhm.
Um, my comment was, if I go there and nobody meets me, I'm having my cup of coffee. If the person shows up, maybe I'm making a new friend. And
Yeah.
I have. So there are ways of making friends. Um, there are senior groups if that's what you're looking for. I'm not I'm not at that point. I'm more active than wanting to go to a seniors group, whether it be at the church or the community center. But those are options. Um,
Yeah.
and you also have to reach back out to your core of friends that you had during your marriage. We all have this belief that, well, they don't have time for us anymore because they're married and I'm not. And that's not true.
No,
Um,
that's not true.
it's it has changed over the years, and
Yeah.
so um,
I don't think that was ever true, though. I will interrupt. Because I think if there's anything, there's a discomfort, like not so much that you were a couple friends together, but it's just how do we redefine this thing a little
well,
bit? Yeah.
exactly. I know that when my uncle passed away, my aunt, she had single female friends, but she had a whole group of friends from her marriage, and
Mhm.
she still went to the same parties, the same events. Um, and after a while, in the beginning, I remember she would drive herself. You know, no, nobody has picked me up. I'm independent. And then she finally got to the point, yeah, you want to come pick me up? Go right ahead. Um, and then as another friend's maybe husband died or whatever, she incorporated those people. And so again, I feel so blessed that I had these people in my life who showed me that I had a choice. I could sit home and cry,
Right.
or I could live. And I do believe that if Rich is watching, which spiritually I do believe he is, um, he's rooting me on. And uh, he enjoyed watching me make a fool of myself on Monday night when I went to my first event. I went to a trivia event.
Hmm.
I don't know trivia, Doug. And I got every answer wrong. I laughed and I had
Right.
a good time, and I'm going back next Monday night. So,
Yeah. And I do think, I had talked about how my mom kept on living even after my dad passed away, even though she had um, six kids that were, the oldest was 17, the youngest was 4. And she, she had that um that resilience that was pretty amazing. Where she did not dwell, even though she had incredible grief and had incredible fears and had whatever, you would not have known it because she just kind of said, picked up and we're going to do, we're going to make this work, kind of a thing. And, but resilience um, is not always easy for some people, and especially if you tie in depression or other things, you have to force yourself sometimes to do whatever you're doing. Get up, have a cup of coffee, go to work. Those things, yeah, sometimes you have to have them, go through the motions
yes,
um, uh, before you can uh, can actually experience something more than the motion. They actually, I think it was C.S. Lewis, who I love. He's one of my favorite writers of all times. But I think C.S. Lewis was the one that said that sometimes when you're in love with someone or have a relationship, you have to act in a loving way for the feelings to come and go through the motions for that to actually happen. And and I'm probably horribly misquoting him by what I'm saying, but I found that is actually true sometimes is, you don't feel like going to the trivia night because you want to kind of be in grief, and instead you go to the trivia night and you realize, at first you're not having fun, but then you start having fun,
exactly.
and because you've gone through the motion of doing that thing. So I think that, what I hear you describe is something that a lot of people would say is you have to get out there and you have to live life, so, so I guess other lessons would be live life,
Yeah.
continue.
Well, and it's understanding that, like you said, you're going to get frozen in time and think, I don't want to do this.
Right.
And actually, that happened to me on Monday. I had a migraine, and I get migraines all the time.
Mm,
So it was like, this is no different than a normal migraine. And I usually work through them. But on Monday afternoon, it was like, oh, this is really bad. Oh, I got to lay down. I lay down, and I'm fighting with myself internally. You're not going to go tonight because you don't feel good. No, you got to go tonight. Back and forth, back and forth. And I had already made plans that I was going to drive this other woman uh, to the event. And about a half hour before I was supposed to pick her up, I finally just got up, washed my face, and called her and said, I'm on my way. And uh, she asked me if I really was okay to drive. My head was pounding, but I just made this decision. I'm
mhm.
going to ignore it because if I give into it, I probably won't ever go to karaoke.
Yeah.
And I knew that about me. And I walked in and it was noisy and it certainly didn't help my headache. But a woman who I'd met previously came up and gave me this big hug.
Mm.
My headache was gone. I
Wow.
was I was ready. And so I
Yeah.
realized that the headache was real, but it was more intense because of my emotional feelings.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful I went. And like I said, I knew nothing. And in the past, that would have bothered me.
Hmm.
It was fun. and nobody cared that I didn't know anything.
Right.
And that to me is part of the getting out there. And it doesn't always work that easily. I'll be the first one to admit, I had lunch with somebody else about 2 months ago. I couldn't wait to leave the restaurant. I had
Mm.
nothing in common with her. And the more we talked, it was like, I kept looking at my watch. And finally, I made an excuse that I had to leave. Now, I did contact her afterwards and explain to her that, I'm sorry it didn't work out. But we weren't even on the same wavelength. That could
Mm.
turn me off to going out and meeting people. But I realized that I probably wasn't the right person for her either.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair. Well, I do think in the end, the steps that all of us take, and as we do um, grieve, is going to be its own path anyway. Um, and but I do think that in the end, we follow a similar route. It may not be the same route, but there are these things that happen. The old thing of like the denial and all that, it's pretty universal. I mean, I think that's actually a great descriptor, and anger, and and things that can oftentimes come. But the path goes way beyond what was described there, and that is, how do we go back to living without um, giving up on what we had with those, whether it be a relationship, or that was a spousal one, or a relationship that is a friendship, where we honor them by living, and I really do believe that there is a heavy responsibility for those who are living to live well, in honor of those who didn't have the opportunity to live on. And so we can live well, and that does bring honor to them. So but I think the probably the greatest kind of dishonor in some ways is if we just stop, if we just say that's it. I think obviously that brings a whole series of issues, not least of which, if you once you stop living, you really stop living. You kind of freeze in time, and at best, and like so many people oftentimes pass away when they're not able to kind of remain,
Sure.
you know, in a good place. Even with that grief. So, you know, I, I think what you've experienced, and I thank you for opening your life a little bit. I think what you've experienced is that microcosm, that thing that many people experience, and as I had mentioned before, so often I found that people, as they get older, because of the way their friendships are, they lose more and more people, and so the world becomes smaller and smaller. And the more you can learn the lessons of living, even with that, without feeling like you're dishonoring someone, I think is a really important lesson. I really think it's one of those things. I've oftentimes said, one of the smartest things someone can do is, not only have your friends that are your age, but try to get younger friends. Uh,
Absolutely.
Mix it up. Don't have everyone be, your age. If you do, there's going to be that last person that's turning out the lights, but
Well, and that's something that as we're growing up, we aren't really taught to have this intergenerational relationships.
oh yeah.
But I found it was interesting at the celebration for my husband that most of my husband's friends were probably somewhere between 20 to 30 years younger than him.
Wow.
And and they've all just like, come around me and told me, that, I can call them at any time. And, um, it just was heartwarming. But what I want people to know, if you're sitting at home and you're going through this, would you say, I can't do what Karen's doing? Get help.
Mm.
There's a lot of help out there, whether it be through religious organizations. Um, there are coaches out there. There are therapists. Go to your medical doctor. There's so many people that can help you get through the process. And I'm not saying forget the person, forget your sadness, but turn your sadness into something more productive for your life. And yes, I still have my sadness. And I can wake up in the middle of the night, you know, looking at the other side of the bed, wondering what happened. Um, and then I try to remember something good that happened.
Yeah.
And it makes a difference. And it's so lonely, but you
Mm.
know what? We can get through those lonely moments, but we need the support.
And one other thing too that I think is a lot of what you had said about getting support, it doesn't cost anything.
Right.
There are, I mean, obviously you could get a professional counselor where it might cost money, but so often clergy, um, uh, grief groups, online, all these things, friends, what it requires is the effort of the person that is grieving to reach out and say,
Exactly.
help, can I talk? Can I whatever? And you can't expect the other person necessarily to be perfect at it. But I think the thing that tells you that um, that is helpful is the fact that they're they're trying. They're
Yeah,
they're trying to relate, that they care enough that they're willing to kind of be with you. Um, and sometimes being with someone doesn't even mean you say anything; it just means you're with them, and that oftentimes can be in itself very comforting.
yep.
Um, so anyway, thank you for um, opening your life and helping hopefully a lot of people. So thank you.
I do this on a daily basis. So if there's anybody out there and you need somebody to talk to, go to the show notes. Um, you can either reach out to Doug at Cherished Companions or feel free to reach out to me um, because this is a journey I'm going to be on for the rest of my life. And
Right.
if I can help you, I think you're going to be helping me in return. So thank you.
Take care.
See you next
Thank you.
month. Bye bye now.
Yeah. Bye bye.